Chairman. Chairman Powell, at the end of this pandemic, we need to ensure that we have a more equal society. Unfortunately, we're not on a path to an equal recovery. As of January, the Black unemployment rate is 9.2%. The Hispanic unemployment rate is 8.6% compared to 5.7% for white workers. According to the New York Fed, over the course of the pandemic, the black labor force exit rate has increased dramatically, while the white labor force exit rate has returned to pre-pandemic levels. Doesn't this mean that the black unemployment rate is likely misleadingly low compared to the white rate?
Well, this, as you point out, this pandemic was particularly bad for these long-standing disparities that we have in our economy. The job losses were heavily concentrated in public-facing service sector jobs. Those tend to be more skewed towards lower-paid and in many cases minorities and women, and so that's really where the big pockets of unemployment were made. And so, and you're right. So the burden really has fallen more in the low and moderate income communities than would typically be the case. It's always the case to some extent. This particular event, though, is very somehow precisely aimed at those people, and we're well aware of that.
Well, I appreciate that acknowledgement. We know from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that over the course of 2020, the labor force participation rate for black men and women fell nearly twice as much as it did for white men and women. So you agree that minority families are bearing the brunt of the damage caused by the pandemic?
Yes, along with others at the lower end of the income spectrum, bottom quartile.
Would you agree then that addressing this disproportionate damage needs to be a central priority in relief efforts?
I would have thought so.
Yeah, so would I. Now, as part of the Federal Reserve's mission to ensure maximum employment, what's the Federal Reserve's plan for maximizing employment for low-income and minority workers?
So we look, when we say that maximum employment is a broad and inclusive goal, that means we look not just at the headline numbers, we also look at different groups, and we try to take all of that into account in making our assessment. So we will take into account the headline numbers, but also those for other groups as we think about reaching maximum employment.
Well, I hope that in your mission that the Federal Reserve looks at this, because a Federal Reserve study showed that while high-income jobs mostly recovered to pre-pandemic levels, unemployment among low-wage workers remains 14% below pre-pandemic levels. And this is in spite of the fact that almost half of all low-wage workers are essential workers, the people who actually let us stay home when we were told stay home to avoid the spread of the pandemic and to be infected, but they were risking their lives in the jobs that they did. And so I believe we have the tools and what we to try to make this an equitable recovery. So would you commit to working with Congress and the Treasury to help low-wage workers and minority workers be able to recover just as strongly as others?
We will do that. I will say, though, that monetary policy as a tool is famously it's a broadly effective tool. It doesn't enable us to target particular groups. It lifts the entire economy, but we're going to be mindful, though, of the disparities that exist as we make our decisions.
Then finally, as of February 1st, an estimated 13 million adults were not caught up on their rent. Another 10 million adults were not caught up on their mortgage payments. Our country is very clearly in the midst of a housing crisis. What would be the effect on the housing market and our overall economy if Congress doesn't provide additional resources to help families struggling to pay their rent and mortgages?
Well, if those people, if it were to get to the point at which people were evicted, then you're talking about people's lives being disrupted in ways that are sometimes quite hard to recover from, both for renters and owners. So it is important. I think the single best thing we can do about that, of course, is to keep monetary policy accommodative to do what we can to speed the recovery so that it will be robust and complete as soon as possible.
Well, losing millions of people losing their homes would not only affect rateable basis and the most single aspect of wealth. So I hope you'll keep your eye on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Senator Shelby.
Good morning, Chairman.